Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Had to Go Out podcast. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to everyone that's watching on YouTube right now. We kind of did that this time to get more YouTube subscribers, so hopefully if you are watching, you're subscribed. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, welcome to everybody. If it's your first time listening or watching, thanks for being here. And yeah, subscribe. Don't just find us and watch once or twice. Please subscribe. We'd really appreciate it, especially on the YouTube, so we can get the live stuff up and going. We've got a great show for you today. We're excited about it, and find more out about us. Any of your social media, Instagram, Twitter. We're not real big on the Twitter, but we're there. But Instagram, Facebook, just type in "They Had to Go Out" into your search bar. We'll come up. You'll find us.
Yep. So I'm completely late today. That's why I passed it straight over to Bill. It's our guest probably just almost dipped out on us, but luckily he stayed. So who we've got with us is Mr. Ron LaBrec. Born and raised out in Connecticut. He was a Coast Guard Academy graduate, class of '89. First operational tour was the Coast Guard cutter Campbell, '89 to '91. Is it weird hearing me talk about your bios? You're sitting there.
Yeah, you better.
Yeah, I
catch your breath because it's pretty long.
Right, I got to get it good.
I did get cramps writing.
We've got from the Campbell. He went to LEDET Cape Cod. That was a precursor to Tacklet North and later MSRT. Went to Group Boston at the ops job. Went to grad school for public relations, came out and became the public affairs officer for D7. Went to Group Eastern Shore as the CEO back when groups were awesome and before they became sectors. But maybe he'll let us talk about that later.
I was like a third when that happened, when they became sectors.
Well, I was too, but yeah. I remember those days. Yeah. Went from there to Trace in Yorktown at the SAR school. Then became chief of public affairs up at headquarters. Man, what a job, sir. Went to Coast Guard Recruiting Command. Did a senior service fellowship and rounded out his career as the assistant superintendent at the Coast Guard Academy, back where he started. Retired after just under 30 years of service in 2018, and now is the Mid-Atlantic director for the Coast Guard Foundation. So he works with Susan when we talked to her before, and luckily they were able to get us their sole Coast Guard veteran that's on staff.
That's right.
So it should be really cool. I can't wait to hear stories about both the foundation, obviously back in his career.
Right. So with that being said, sir, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. What is your most dangerous, daring, or epic sea story or stories?
Well, first of all, I'm tired just from you reading that bio.
Awesome.
It took a long time, but it's great to be here. Thanks for what you're doing with this podcast. I think it's really important to tell these stories, Coast Guard stories, to record the history of our service, and so it's a pleasure to be here. I'll tell you, when it comes to search and rescue cases and sea stories, there's, through your career, there's a few that stand out, and often it's for different reasons, And so probably the one that stands out for me was on that cutter Campbell. It was one of my first
Those
search
are the
and
best
rescue.
ones.
Yes.
The best ones are the first ones.
And I'll tell you why. So it was maybe the first fall that we were on, me and my classmates were on the ship. So it would have been the fall of '89 or maybe the winter of '90. Pretty early once we'd gotten on. It was a search and rescue case. And like most search and rescue cases, when you're on a ship, it's usually when you're homeward bound, right? And you get diverted for a search and rescue case. But it was off of New England, and it was for a fishing vessel that was gone, and that had been lost.
Let's talk about the Campbell real fast.
Yeah,
just
sure.
For those who don't know, what kind of ship was she? And then obviously you're an ensign, so kind of. Those are funny stories too. Before we get into the back, but what kind of ship was she home ported? And
so the cutter Campbell's a 270-foot medium endurance cutter, and at the time she was home ported out of New Bedford, Massachusetts. And we were, yeah, it was a great town to be located out of. Great fishing history, mariner history, to be located out of there.
Something to live up to, I think, there, right? Those were professional mariners for generations.
Yeah, whalers and fishermen, and shipbuilding occurred in that part of the country, and so to know that you were going out there and one of the boats that was literally tied up next to you could be the boat that you were assisting was kind of a heavy responsibility.
For sure.
But we were the second crew on the Campbell. The crew before us had commissioned it, and so it was a great time to be aboard. And we did mostly counter-drug patrols in the Caribbean, but we did do 1 or 2 fisheries patrols. And so we're coming back from this patrol, and this boat had gone down, and it was in the middle of a storm. And we're talking, they were recording the wave heights at 30 plus, so we really don't know how big the waves were. And you think, well, that's a pretty big wave, but that's a pretty big ship, right?
That's how you start to see a story.
Right.
There.
Right.
That was it. Yep.
But you think you're on a 270-foot ship, so what's 30? It's
right.
like a quarter of the length, so it shouldn't be a big deal. But
massive.
But it's
Massive.
massive, yeah. And so, you know, we're just executing a search pattern, and there were some aircraft in the air as well, but it was horrific weather. And it was the kind of thing where we would make a turn on the track, right, to go back the other way, and you'd kind of wallow in the trough, and you weren't sure you were coming out the other
right,
way.
like
you know?
hopefully she rewrites before.
Exactly. But, you know, the things that stick out from that case for me, there's really three things. And one is, you know, I remember at one point when we were stuck in the trough, and stuff had broken loose on the fantail. I don't remember if it was the gas cans for the small boat at the time or something. And so, you know, it was up to volunteers to go out and secure the fantail, because you don't want gasoline banging around on the back of a ship when you're executing a SAR case. And I remember some of my shipmates went out there and secured those, and I'm like, man, that's gutsy.
Yeah.
I mean, it was tough being on the bridge. I can't imagine being on the fantail of a 270.
It was probably the guys who tied it down to start with.
Well, maybe. So maybe it was like the BMC said, hey, you're going out. We were told they were volunteers. I don't know.
Right.
But that's one. And then the other thing was, you know, as we're executing this search, and, you know, all of us were hoping we would find somebody.
Mhm.
But I don't think any of us really were expecting to find survivors, because it had been a while, and it was just horrific weather. And we did find some debris. You know, when you found the debris and you didn't find survivors, you know, that's when you're just hoping against hope that you find somebody. And I remember I was the OD, and I climbed up onto the top where the lookout's looking through the big eyes. And there was this, you know, the seaman who was the lookout, and this kid was pouring his eyes into those big eyes. You know, I mean, everybody was. If you were topside, you were just looking, you know. And this kid was just doing his best to give those folks the chance to come home.
Yeah.
You know, and that really stuck with me throughout my career, because it just showed me, and this was, you know, a time and time again proven true, that, you know, we've got the Coast Guard, which is a great system. We have the search and rescue system. We have all these opportunities to put these wonderful assets out in a place where they can rescue somebody. But oftentimes it comes down to that one guy or that one gal, right? To see
What a
that
great
blip.
observation.
To see that blip on the radar screen, or to see that little head poking out of the surf, or to, you know, see a light that maybe isn't a star, and to say something. You know, have the courage to first of all say, I want to go over there to see that, you know. And that's often the difference between life and death. And so, you know, that case stands out to me for that reason, because it's the individuals of the service that really execute the mission. And I'll tell you what, you know, so having now been at the foundation for a year and a half, you see that come through in terms of how people their understanding of the Coast Guard and why they want to support it. You know, because the Coast Guard Foundation is about supporting the men and women of the Coast Guard. You know, helping their readiness, helping their quality of life, things that help that seaman on the big eyes be ready to go, right, and ready to shine when his or her moment comes. So that's the one that really sticks out in my mind because of the long range impact it has.
What a cool story. Like, even just hearing it, right, just makes you kind of remember the caliber of people that you've worked with. Right? Like, I mean, we work with, like, I mean, the Coast Guard are not these, you're not ordered to go out there, and you might be ordered to go out there and stay at lookout, right? But at the end of the day, like, it all really depends on what kind of person that is. Like, are they standing a good lookout?
There's not many people are climbing up on top of the bridge to actually check on how good a job the lookout's doing, because nobody wants to be up there in good weather, let alone 30-foot seas. And that's the other thing for anybody who's not a coastie listening. That's not a seasoned professional up there. That's one of the most junior people on the boat. That's probably an 18, 19-year-old kid who they've been on the boat for a couple weeks more than likely. And it's because it's one of the first things you're allowed to do.
Yeah, and
then you got a 22-year-old officer of the deck too, right? I mean, like, honestly, you know, like, you know, Ron over here is leading the day basically that day, and both junior guys,
I'm going to tell you guys the captain was on the bridge quite a bit too during that search.
So yes, he was, and the other thing I remember from that.
You know better.
Not this captain, no. So the other thing from that case, which is a little lighthearted that I remember, is, so as I said, we get stuck in the trough, trying to get out of the trough, and at one point, you know, I was the OD, and we're just going back and forth, and he looks at me and he goes, "Ron, get us out of here."
Fix it, right? Fix it.
And I'm like, all right, you know, jam the throttles down. You try to get through the waves, you know, and but again, you know, that was serious. I mean, we would have been shaken apart, you know what I mean? And so having the captain there, they go, not grabbing it himself, but going, "Ensign, fix it."
Right.
That speaks a lot to the way we operate as well, right? We enable our junior members to have those trials by fire so that they can then succeed. or fail and then succeed later,
Right.
so that they can do the things they need to do.
It's a heck of a lesson learned too, right? That fix it. You're like, can you fix it in 39 like slop up here? Yeah, that's awesome. Talk to us about, so before we get to the maybe more into the mission of the foundation.
Sure.
So LEDET Cape Cod. So everybody now is familiar with MSSTs, MSRTs, dog
Yep.
units. What back when it was LEDET Cape Cod? What were we looking at? What was the mission? What, how were you guys made up?
Yeah, so at that time, the LEDETs were spread all around the Coast Guard. So they were assigned to group offices, or they were assigned to, in my case, the operational training team, the fish school up there in New England. And they would do the same mission that TACLETs are doing now, in terms of deploying on mostly Navy ships at the time, U.S. Navy ships, Allied Navy ships, going downrange and doing counter-drug operations. We also did UN embargo operations. So after the Gulf War, when Yugoslavia was falling apart, making sure that arms weren't going to those regimes that were committing horrible human rights violations and that sort of stuff. And so you'd take a team of 6 or 7 coasties and go on a Navy ship and do boardings.
Love the
It was
Coast Guard,
fantastic.
right? Like,
Yeah,
you never know what you're gonna
slap
get
on the
into.
web gear and
Yeah.
go over the gunnels. I mean,
Right.
it was a great mission. We worked with some wonderful Navy crews during that time, and eventually, so between IMLET, which was the South American counter drug operation, and then the LEDETs, we formed the TACLETs, and so that was kind of the beginning of the dog community, the deployable community. And so when all the TACLETs were formed up, they gathered all the LEDETs together, and so that helped improve the professionalism, the camaraderie. You could trade people out and go do other, if somebody was down, you could augment the team. And so now we have the forces that we have, with guys jumping on semi-submersibles and banging on hatches. I mean, it's
Go ahead.
it's just an amazing thing to see. Over those 20 years. That community continue to do amazing things for this country in terms of keeping drugs off the streets.
And as a, I'm guessing you were probably a Lieutenant JG at the time when you were
Yeah, so I was a lieutenant at JG when I
Yeah.
started, and then I was a lieutenant. I was promoted to lieutenant
Didn't
during
screw up
one
too
of the.
bad.
What's that?
Didn't screw up too
No,
bad.
it was funny. I actually promoted myself on a Navy ship because
Yeah.
there was nobody around to do it. So I just showed up one day with the lieutenant bars. XO looked at me and said, "Congratulations," I guess. Or
Yeah.
something,
No wedding down on that one.
Yeah, no, I mean we were just doing our thing.
That's good.
It was a great tour for a junior officer because you got to really focus on that mission. We got some amazing training as well that you just didn't get when you were doing law enforcement from Coast Guard cutters or small units, just because that was our mission, and so we were as prepared as we could be for that mission.
What's the most dramatic bust you guys had, or maybe just the most dramatic deployment?
They were all fun.
Yeah, I'm sure.
First of all.
Yeah.
Now, probably the most interesting deployment was the deployment to the Red Sea following the Gulf War, and that was interesting because we were boarding probably 3 or 4 really large cargo ships every day for essentially 100 days, and every manner of cargo ship, container ship, row, break bulk, LNG, whatever was kind of going through, we had to board and make sure there weren't any weapons or other things. And so the number of professional mariners that we came in contact with from all different flags and all different countries, it was really eye-opening to really get a better sense of kind of how the maritime system worked. Because up to that point, I had just been on the cutter, I'd been at some small boat stations and been doing some counter-drug work. But to see how the whole system worked, and then to see how you would try to move all these ships through as quickly as possible so they could do their mission, but at the same time making sure they weren't bringing in weapons. That was fun work, and working with Navy crews was fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody speak English on these ships? Like, is that?
No, I mean most folks
Yeah.
did. Yeah, I
Just
mean most
curious.
of the captains, professional mariners did.
They're
occasionally,
supposed to be able to, right? There should be at least one English speaker on the boat, like at all times.
Usually there were.
Yeah.
Some of them weren't happy to be boarded.
Yeah.
I remember one German captain. So one of the rules was you had to have the containers stacked only 4 high, because we'd climb them up. We'd climb up the containers and crack them open and see what was in there, and they had to be accessible, so they couldn't be face to face, door to door. And this guy's containers were all not accessible.
Right.
And I had to tell him, "You're not going in." And it was interesting because he's a professional
was
mariner.
interesting.
It was
I can tell
interesting. He's a
what you did later
professional
in your
mariner.
career.
You learned some German curse words.
No. But I mean, really, for him, he was going to lose millions of dollars,
Right.
by being diverted and having to go back into port and have those containers stacked a different way. And so again, showing you that the work we do, that we deal with professional mariners, has real impacts to their bottom
Right.
line and to their livelihood. And so you try to do it as professionally as you can, try not to impact their commerce as
Right.
much as you can.
I think that's a lesson that you learn too, is you know, like you said, as you do these boardings, sometime the realization hits you that you are now the representative of the United States, right? Like
Right.
out there. So what you say, yeah, it's a little bit you, but at the end of the day, like as long as you're, you know, within the
Mhm.
policy and the law, I mean, you are the United States.
Right.
So that's a big power and a big responsibility to have. So
Yeah.
interesting
Well,
dynamic.
And I kind of realized that too when I was on the cutter. So you just realize just how big that maritime transport system is,
Mhm.
and how, for me, it was going through the Panama Canal multiple times,
Mhm.
and just seeing everything that went through there and realizing that everything you buy in a store was on a ship at some point in time, probably.
Yeah.
Literally just about everything. So if we slow that system down too much, we're literally slowing down an entire, like, global commerce in its entirety. We have the ability to if we're not careful.
Yep.
Or if we need to, depending on which route
Depending on
that
how you do
goes.
it. Yeah.
You know, you drive by the anchorage and you see, like, you know, if they're stacked out there, something went wrong. Like
Right.
somebody screwed up somewhere, either
Right.
on the dock or that's funny. So the public affairs office out in D7, and then you stayed in that public affairs realm. How did that shape your outlook on the Coast Guard? What was what lessons learned maybe from those kind of jobs?
So, you know, one of the things folks often say, you know, what's your favorite job in the service? I'm sure you guys have had that question,
Mhm.
right? And, you know, the thing I'll often say is, well, it depends on the reason, right? Because some jobs are your favorite because they're just fun.
Mhm.
The LEDET was fun,
Right.
you know. Some jobs you learn a lot. Some jobs you see a lot. Some jobs you're able to see your family more. And so, you know, through making the most out of all of your positions in the service, you can craft a good career,
Mhm.
right? So in the public affairs arena, really, you know, I was blessed when I was in D7 by having, you know, working directly for some wonderful district commanders, Admiral Saunders, Admiral Allen, Admiral Carmichael, and being able to see what they did and how they made their decisions. You know, District 7 is a pretty busy place.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stuff going on there. And to see how they manage their staff, how they manage their time, how they manage the operations in the district, from a learning perspective, you know, those 3.5 years in Miami, I learned an incredible amount of just how things worked.
You had me when you said you worked for Admiral Allen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to go.
That's it, we're done.
Yep, I know. We just had the lights shut off. So
Lights
we
are on
didn't-
an automatic
that's what
timer.
that
Excuse
was.
me for 1 second.
Yeah, there we go. So, there we go, and they're back on. Obviously, let's.
I mean, to your
Imagine.
point, you know, I mean, when Admiral Allen, within his first couple of weeks of being in Miami, and I had already been there as public affairs officer for a year, we had the Surfside 6 incident, which you may or may not recall.
I definitely remember the name. I can't remember the specifics.
Yeah, so I mean, that was, you know, some Cuban migrants were trying to make shore basically in Miami Beach, and this was during the wet foot, dry foot policy,
Mhm.
where if you made it to shore, you could stay, and if you were interdicted at sea, you'd have to go back. And during that interdiction, there was some use of force by Coast Guard boat crews that, rightly, the community said, "Is this how we do business?" And so to watch Admiral Allen kind of marshal our investigative resources and to, you know, analyze what had occurred, you know, with the help of an investigator and his staff, you know, what had occurred, what did the policy that guided the crews say, and how did they execute against it? You know, that was impressive. But then to see also, you know, how we work to address the public affairs concerns, the community concerns about Coast Guard. You know, Coasties were not wearing their uniform in the community for several months after that because
Mhm.
people were so upset. So it's really an example of how the Coast Guard's reputation locally makes a big difference. You know, so I know we're going to talk about sectors and groups in a little bit, but you know, every Coast Guard
It's
unit.
not like a green light.
No, I mean,
Yeah, I know.
but let me just say, you know, every Coast Guard unit has a great responsibility, right, to represent the service, as you were saying, to the
Right.
local community. And when they do that well, things go really well, and you can survive. The organization can survive questions about how it operates, because fundamentally people know we're trying to do a good job, we're trying to be professional out there. So that's probably the biggest thing from kind of that public affairs.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I think that's
Yeah.
that's a big lesson to learn.
Yeah, I mean, it guided me for the rest of my
That goes down to when you stop at Walmart on the way home and you're
Sure.
still in uniform. You're
Mhm.
all the way up to how we do the job when we're on the board, and I think people forget that at times.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When I talk to some of our supporters, Coast Guard Foundation supporters in the out in the field, I'll say, you know, have you ever run into some Coasties? And like, oh yeah, I love our Coasties. And they, you know, they'll say our Coasties. You know, I see them at the gym, I see them in the supermarket. they're just good people. They're wonderful people. And so folks see that, and they know the service we provide. They see we're good people, and they want to support that through their incredible generosity. They want to support our Coast Guard folks who do that. It means the world to kind of our mission and our ability to support Coast Guard members.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the off-duty impacts of whatever. Not, I mean, I think now that you say Surfside 6, I think I might have been in Miami down there. Do you remember the year, give or take?
It was probably 2000, 2001.
Yeah, so there were still like effects, I guess, from that, but
Right.
in maybe like 07 or so, because there were certain areas that you wouldn't go in with a Coast Guard license plate or a Coast Guard sticker on your car.
Yeah, and I wouldn't. I mean, I guess I wouldn't overblow that too much. I mean, it was a precautionary thing.
Right, sure.
But one of the things that was important. This is
I love
important.
Miami, by the way.
Absolutely.
I mean, Miami is a Coast Guard
No,
town
I know
for sure.
it is. Yeah. But one of the things that's important, is that. One, knowing how the Coast Guard missions are perceived, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then helping people to understand why we do the things that we do. Because, people go about their day, they don't know about the maritime transit system. They
Right.
don't know kind of how we do things. And when you explain that to folks and you help them understand, the rules and the policies and the various laws and things that folks are trying to do, they understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people in the Miami community don't want to see people dying at sea, right? They want to see people surviving from sea. And so we were aligned in that objective to keep people safe at sea coming from Cuba. And so actually, after that period, we had great support from the Miami community because we had that conversation with them. And we were able to come to an understanding of understanding each other's perspectives and say, yeah, okay, we understand why you're doing what you do. We understand why you feel the way that you do. We can agree that we want to save lives. And this is how we're going to try to do that.
Very cool. Love it. Let's talk about groups and sectors. No, so you were group ops in Boston, and
Yeah.
then group Eastern Shore CO,
Yeah.
and that was it, right? That one CO
Right.
job. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
let's take us through that maybe progression. I know the ops job. I think you tell us. I can't even remember how groups were organized at
No.
this point. I mean, now we're in a sector world. So, what is a group? And then
So at the time, the group was essentially the response element of the Coast Guard in any port. And so overseeing the stations, the AIDS navigation team, any of the small cutters, doing the planning for search and rescue for law enforcement operations, anything non-maritime, marine safety related, the group had responsibility for. And then the marine safety offices at the time were the captain of the ports and had all the marine safety inspections and regulatory authority. And so as group ops, we were supervised the stations, the H navigation team, the couple cutters, and did the Ready for Ops program, oversaw the command center with the search and rescue planners, that kind of thing. It was a great job. I was very thankful and lucky to kind of arrive in that community, coming out of the tactical law enforcement community. It was a great combination of my cutter time and my tactical law enforcement time, because it all comes together really at the group level where you're doing both of those missions. So it was super, and I was very happy to be in Boston. Go Patriots, by the way.
No, just laughs.
I don't need any help.
Yeah, you're right. Good point. They might need a public relations guy right now, though.
Yeah, well.
I don't know if I've been watching the news.
Not in New England.
I think
we
Bill
don't.
Belichick
Not New
is
England,
there.
yeah.
Haven't been stationed out there.
Nationally, though, there's some, the new hire didn't go so well, it looked like.
Yeah.
This is not a football podcast, Bill.
I didn't start. You started this. I didn't start
Yeah,
this.
I couldn't help it.
I guess I
I
started.
giggle when I giggle when I hear Patriots. I was stationed up there for 3 years. I know that place is insane for their football and their baseball.
Where's Eastern Shore? Were you on Cape Cod?
No, so Eastern Shore is Eastern Shore, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And so the Delmarva Peninsula.
Chincoteague.
Yeah, so it's the Delmarva Peninsula has a little bit of Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia.
Yep.
It's 3 states, 9 counties, and a whole lot of chickens is kind of the
That's
the
a
moniker
really
when
good
we were there.
description, sir.
But it's actually a beautiful part of the country.
Right.
Just absolutely rural. A lot of farms, a lot of really, it's just beautiful seashore between the Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Bay.
Mhm.
And so we had all the oceanside operations from there, and it was a great.
And Hampton Roads took everything internal, I guess.
So Hampton, at the time, Hampton Roads had Chesapeake Bay and then south of Chesapeake Bay.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
Gives-
Activities Baltimore, which was Sector Maryland, essentially had the northern Chesapeake Bay.
What's a good lesson learned from your time? Let's go with CO. CO is Group Eastern Shore. I mean, you're commanding at that point how many people?
I think we had about 150 active duty
Yeah.
folks in the.
Is that just at the group, or is that because
It included the outlying stations.
including the outline?
Yeah.
Okay, so over 150 people.
Yeah.
you know, and I know from experience, right, they kick the worst issues to your level in general from those outlying units to help them handle or problems to solve. What you know, what kind of lessons learned? What's the biggest takeaway from that time in command?
So when I think back to that command, again, there's a search and rescue case that kind of stands out most in my mind, and for the reason that I'll explain. So we had Ocean City, Maryland was our busiest station in the sector. It's still a very busy Coast Guard station. And one early morning, we had a diver go down. A young man from Ocean City didn't surface with his buddies, and so we started a search and rescue case. We had boats out there, we had helicopters, and we searched all day. And we were, you know, he was never seen to have surfaced. So we were searching in the event that he surfaced to try to save him. But over the course of the day and later, it became clear that he probably was on the bottom. And so we had asked the Ocean City Fire Department to come out and, you know, start a subsurface search for him as well. And at one point, it, you know, became the time to start having next of kin discussions in terms of suspending the active search. And I had one or two of those at Group Boston, but this really was my first one in person with a family. And so driving up to Ocean City to meet with his family, with a local official who knew the family well. And I remember going into that house, and it was like a funeral had already started. It was absolutely quiet. You couldn't hear a thing. And then talking to the mother, and her reaction, the grief and the anger and the horror were just something that is with me and will be with me for the rest of my life. And the father of the son, unable to console his wife. He couldn't even console himself, let alone console his wife. And that meant a lot to me. And when I was later the chief of the National Search and Rescue School, one of the things my predecessors had started, and which I continued, was to do the class where we talk about active search suspension. We talk about suspending a search. And you know, I talked about the Coast Guard's this incredible system, right? All these assets, all this system. The search and rescue system is incredible, right? The way we search, you guys know, I mean, it's computer aided. It's using the very best in tides and currents and wind data. It's using the best in terms of probability models. You know, and so there's all that science, but suspending a search is not a math problem, right? It's a life and death decision. And we just have to remember that every day. And it was just, it stuck with me for obvious reasons. But I think the thing that's interesting about that is that folks do that, right? I mean, every time you see a search suspended, you know, on the news or something, somebody had to do that next to kin.
Right.
You know, and you think of, if you know how that, first of all, there's a life lost, but second of all, you know that there's a family whose whole world has just ended, and it's just been crushed. You know, and you carry that responsibility as a Coast Guard member every time you go out and try to save somebody, or when you decide it's beyond hope to continue to search for them. And it's an important thing to remember when we're trying to execute, right? Whatever our mission, we got to remember that. You got to remember, in my mind, I remember his mom. And that, you know, led me to do a lot of things in my career. And I'm sure we've all had those moments where we said, this is why I'm here, first of all, and this is why I'm going to do my best while I'm here to do what I can do.
Huge. Yeah, I don't envy you having to make that conversation or those calls whatsoever.
Well, I mean, you know, quite frankly, it's a responsibility, but it's a privilege, right? I mean, it's an honor to do that because you're representing the work of so many people who are trying to save that person, and you owe it to those crews to try to help the family understand or to help them grieve. And so again, it comes down to the individuals, right? Which I'll tie back to the foundation, if I may.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Because, you know, the other thing, you know, one other instance, and it's what actually led me to join the Coast Guard Foundation. I was thankful enough to be hired by them. But when I was in Coast Guard Headquarters, Chief Public Affairs, from about 2008 to 2012, you know, we lost a number of Coast Guard aircraft. There was 1705, and the anniversary of that is coming up. It was C-130 out of Sacramento. We lost CG-6505 out of Barbers Point helicopter. We lost a helicopter out of Mobile Bay.
6535.
6535. And then we lost a helicopter off the coast of Washington, an H-60. I think it's 6017, right? And so in each of those instances, the Coast Guard found, you know, I was working with the headquarters team to support the service and provide information to the public. The Coast Guard Foundation stepped in and they arranged memorial services. They brought family out, you know, to Hawaii, to various places to be with crews. They brought crew members to funerals and tried to help crew and family begin the process of grieving and then healing. And I saw that commitment by folks who weren't even a part of, you know, our service as I understood it at the time.
Mhm.
And I said, wow, that's pretty tremendous. You know, now I've since come to realize that the members of the Coast Guard Foundation and the supporters that believe in the mission, I believe, are as much a part of the Coast Guard as we are as active Coast Guard members and veterans, because they really buy into what you all are doing.
Mhm.
You know, they buy into the mission, they buy into the people. They, like I said, they see you at the grocery store and they love you. And so, you know, that incident said, you know, I think I'd like to join the Coast Guard Foundation someday.
Mhm.
Yeah, I did.
And yeah, here you are.
Yeah,
Yeah,
worked
awesome.
out.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think those, you know, those, you can't do it without support.
No.
Community support, national level support, and then especially to step in times of need, like, you know, like the ones you were discussing where we've lost lives and family members have been lost, and to have them come in and do that, it's, Susan blew our mind, you know, when
Yeah,
we talked,
yeah.
and yeah, I mean.
There wasn't a lot of, we didn't have a lot to say back because it was so impactful that I didn't really know a lot of that stuff. I kind of learned it from when we spoke with Susan.
Yeah, if anybody was skipping the Coast Guard Foundation episode, the first one that we
Don't
did,
go back.
do not skip that episode. You need to go back. You need to have your families listen to it. There's I mean, that's just a deep impact across the entire service that I guarantee 90% of us had no idea
No.
whatsoever. So the Coast Guard Foundation is a big one.
Well, it's really news you can use, right? Because,
Right.
I mean, she talked about all the programs that we provide for Coast Guard members, the different scholarships, the morale support, the different activities that really benefit Coast Guard families, but they can't benefit them if they don't know about them.
Very true.
You know, and so part of our job in the field is to meet with Coast Guard units and help them understand the different programs, the different application procedures, so that they can take advantage of the incredible generosity of our donors.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'll ask you, so we just had the rating force master chief for the Coast Guard on, right? Or for the boatmate rating.
Same thing.
Yeah,
Coast
whatever.
Guard
Even might as well
boatmates,
be the
it's-
Coast
yeah,
Guard,
it's the same thing.
So he, you know, enlisted command, right? So he's done.
Oh, Master Chief Vanderhaven.
Yeah, right. Well, he's not the rating force master. Yeah,
All right,
he's
for the Coast Guard.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boatmates. That's
So
what really
he had
counts.
a command philosophy, or you know, his take on command philosophies, I guess,
Mhm.
from the enlisted side. So having a previous commanding officer of a group, what was your command philosophy while you were there?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you know, one of the things I tried to do throughout my time was it's a matter of the mission of the unit, and then what you want to achieve, right, when you come in and do your scan, and what you want to achieve for helping to improve the unit, and then also what the unit kind of needs at the time, right? It's very temporal, I think, because you know the unit exists at a point in time, and the crew that's there exists at a point in time, and so it always varied depending on what unit I was at, quite frankly. And Group Eastern Shore was a long time ago, so I honestly don't remember it.
No, it's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think that's,
But you know, I mean, it's important, I think, to you know, you certainly have your core values, right? And there are the elements of leadership, you know, the defined elements of leadership that we're all taught and that we all aspire to do really well. But then molding that to something that operationally works for the unit at the time is really the important part,
Mhm.
in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
No,
Like, you're right.
I think well said about the change. So I know as we were kind of chatting before we were setting up gear, we were talking about, you know, sometimes it seems like when you're more junior, you know, second class and below maybe, it doesn't seem like the Coast Guard changes a whole lot. And then as you get farther up, you realize how much change is kind of constant and how much the higher levels, some people are trying to force it, some are trying to kind of stop it to protect their crews, and what actually filters down. And you're right, it's every unit's so different from year to year, or even year to year, I would say at best. Like transfer season to transfer season, you might change a third of the crew.
Mhm.
You might go from almost all married people with children to
Mhm.
all single people, and they're going to need some very different things and
Mhm.
different guidance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
God, that would be a heck of a turnover, wouldn't it? Yeah, all like walking the line married people to all, you know, I'm assuming single
Right.
people can also walk the line.
They can.
The line may be a little wider.
The line's in a different place.
Right, line's in a different place. So, so let's talk about, you know, we said we were going to talk about it just because you were at a group, right?
Mhm.
And now we're all under sectors. That would, instituted a lot of changes. There were a lot of things I think that changed, particularly with the prevention side coming over and joining that kind of command structure for otherwise operational units. And then also the authorities that were brought over with that. The captain of the port being like, containing one person, I think, at the top level. What were you part of that transition whatsoever? Either like communicating it up, down, or laterally, and I don't know, just your take on it, I guess, kind of.
Yeah, so when I left Group Eastern Shore in 2005, we were, sectors had just been starting to stand up, and actually very shortly after I left, Group Eastern Shore kind of was split apart into two sectors at the time, and the office became a sector field office. And so we certainly knew the intent and what the plan was for sectors. And I absolutely think that the bringing of the commands together created better unity of effort. I mean, undoubtedly. I mean, I was in Group Boston. We had a wonderful relationship with Marine Safety Office Boston. I mean, we worked together really well. But at the end of the day, there were two separate commands there, so you had to navigate that. And we're done again.
Our lights.
And so you had to navigate that, and that took effort to do that. But when you brought it in one house, I mean, you really have one command authority there. So unity of effort is improved there. The other thing that folks don't think about, I think, when they think about the sector pieces, is the professionalization of our boat forces. That over the last 20 plus years has been incredible, and you all are part of that here at Training Center Yorktown with the Boat Forces Center and the BMA School, Boatswain A School, and the Sea School, the various Cox and Sea Schools. I mean, when I first came into Boat Forces, it was not nearly as standardized. I mean, the standardization teams had just stood up. You had every station officer in charge kind of in EPO kind of doing their own thing a little bit differently about how they maintain the boats, teaching things a little bit differently about how you do the drills, allocating money in different places depending on what they valued, and subsequently, our boat readiness was nowhere near what it is nowadays. And then certainly our boats weren't standard.
Right.
Who likes this radar, who likes that radar, what chief alt is here and EPO alt is there. And so over the time of boat forces standardization and then sectorization and then the establishment of better training systems and better PQS systems and that kind of thing, our boat forces are in incredible shape. I mean, they're world class now. And that's because of all that work that went in over the 20 plus years that I was in boat forces.
What about what do you think of, and I just got to ask it, so command and control at that sector level, right? How do you feel about remote command or off-site command versus on-scene command? And how is that dynamic kind of shored up?
By on-scene, you mean like on-scene commander? On
Yeah,
the water?
so taking it out of the SAR, maybe out of the SAR construct, we're always operating under that, but there's some weird verbiage in the manual. But let's say, you've on scene, you've got a coxswain or a cutter CO, right? Who's on scene there with the case, whatever it may be. And then you've got a displaced sector command center, with command staff and with the command center staff.
Yeah, sure.
How would you envision that working perfectly, I guess?
Well, I think from your smile, I know kind of what your question is, and I'll say, it's
You're trying to get the public affairs officer to actually say something here.
This is
not
really
a bad
important.
thing. I think this is like
this
a
is an
problem,
important
right?
thing. It's a really important thing because, obviously back in the command center, you have great resources to direct the search, to plan the search. You have a lot of inputs and a lot of situational awareness, right? That system brings to you. And your oversight, right? You're in many cases the safety valve as well to certain things that are going on in the water. But at the end of the day, the coxswain that's on the boat is on scene. Whether it's the coxswain on a small boat, whether it's the commanding officer on a patrol ship, a patrol boat, or a larger ship. And so it's really important for that on-scene commander, right, to have the ability to do what he or she needs to do. Now, there's got to be that tie back, right? Because sometimes things are bumpy and waves are going, and you need somebody to double check your thinking on something. But you've got to have the ability to execute the mission within guidance and within policy. And a case on the Eastern Shore really brought that home for me. So, we have a national park and a national seashore, right? The Assateague National Seashore that stretches from Ocean City, Maryland, down past Chincoteague to the end of Assateague Island. And there was a storm one night where a towboat was towing a barge. It was a fuel barge, and it broke its tow. And it was only, maybe 5-10 miles offshore. It was not far offshore at all. And so we sent a boat, I believe it was out of Ocean City, it was a motor lifeboat, to go and try to help out. And there was still a guy on the barge, right? And he's just floating there on the barge, and the tug's trying to, reestablish the tow. And so I'm in the command center. It was late at night, but I came in, and we're having the discussion with the coxswain. And at one point, I could tell that it was really getting hairy as he's trying to get the guy off the boat. And I knew he wasn't going to talk to me, and I was okay with that, right? So you got to understand when you're remote, sometimes you're maybe not going to get some information as quickly as you think you need it or that you want it, but that's because the folks on the water are dealing with some pretty gnarly stuff, and they'll get back to you as soon as they can. And so that kind of reminded me that, And the same thing is when you're at Coast Guard headquarters and a local commander is dealing with an incident, and you'd like to get information faster because you maybe have folks that are breathing down your neck, but that Coast Guard commander is doing the best they can at the time to do the thing that they need to do. And they know you need information, and they'll let you know as soon as they can. And so there's got to be a great deal of trust in the system, right? And so if everybody follows the policies and does the training and knows each other and trusts each other, the system works better.
Very good point.
That's my .02.
I liked it. I thought that was good. I knew when we had talked about your bio earlier, and you said I think you came down to Chief of Public Affairs. I'm like, man, this is gonna be a tougher one, right? Like it's a little intimidating, I think. Being able to interview the former Chief of Public Affairs.
I'm intimidated by you guys. You guys get 30,000 podcast views.
Yeah.
You guys are killing it.
Don't tell them that. No.
Want to edit that out? We can edit that out.
We'll take it out in post.
Yeah. So a lot of people told us like 4 million,
Right.
I meant 30 million.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
We're bigger than the Super Bowl.
There we go. Well, Mr. LaBrec, tell us the Coast Guard Foundation. We've got you here. Luckily, you were traveling for work, and happened to be passing through the area. We heard about it. We're able to get in touch with you and get you here. How can we spread that message a little wider, maybe, or what would you have for our audience about the Coast Guard Foundation?
Sure. So for Coast Guard members that are in the service now, coastguardfoundation.org is our website. All of our applications for our different scholarship programs, spouse scholarships, children college scholarships, education grants, it's all online. We announce it all online. So you can sign up for our newsletter and kind of be kept aware of that. But they also all go out via Coast Guard All Coast. So I don't know how much All Coasts are read anymore. Y'all read them?
We do.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, that's because you're exemplary, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, I read them, but
It could be an all coast, all CG, PSC, all CG.
yeah. So
they've
all of
got
ours,
message
all of
systems.
ours go out as all coasts.
Okay.
And so keep paying attention to those, and you'll see the application kind of procedures and deadlines. So that'd be one thing. The other thing for active duty Coast Guard members is one of our big programs is providing morale, fitness, and wellness support at local units. And so there's a process called the shipmate list every year where the Coast Guard Foundation solicits kind of needs that Coast Guard units have. And so I would encourage all folks to take part in that process that is run by Community Services Command so that we can support your needs. Like I said, we have donors who want to support their local Coast Guard units. We have some donors that are interested in supporting education initiatives, others who are interested in supporting families. And so one of the great honors and privileges I have is to help go out there and talk to Coast Guard units and see what their needs are, and then talk to our generous donors and try to match those needs up. And it doesn't work if we don't know the needs from Coast Guard members, and we can't go and tell those to the folks that want to support. So that's what I'd say for active duty members. And for members of the public who enjoy the Coast Guard or appreciate the Coast Guard, coastguardfoundation.org if you'd like to join our mission. We'd love to have you. We have a network of about 24,000 loyal donors who support our work and support Coast Guard members, and we'd love to have you aboard.
Perfect. And I will reiterate our interview with Susan. I think episode 35. It was the Coast Guard Foundation special episode. If you have not listened to that,
you should.
You really should.
That one was almost a public service announcement. It felt like, not on purpose, but when we were done, I felt like we did a public service by people getting a chance to listen to that one if they did, because the information was incredible.
Right. I mean, what that organization does for the service is huge. And if you, like Mr. Captain LaBrec said, if you have if you want to donate, coastguardfoundation.org, and I'm sure they can find your name on there and contact info too. So, perfect. Hey, Captain, we really appreciate you being here today. We thank you for your stories, and truly thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, and thanks for what you're doing to get the word out.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much, Captain.